If you're planning on retiring at 60 or even sooner, there's one mistake I commonly see that holds people back. It's subtle, but it's powerful enough to keep you working years way longer than you actually need to. And here's the kicker. To fix this, it doesn't mean actually saving more or even working longer. No, it means looking at retirement through a different lens. And I've seen this working with clients for well over a decade in the retirement space play out time and time again. That is with clients who are financially ready on paper to retire, but they second guess themselves. They try and run the numbers through this outdated rule, and they end up costing themselves valuable years. So that is exactly why we're making this video today, so that you could stop letting outdated rules dictate your retirement timeline and instead get busy living, get busy enjoying retirement. And the mistake is relying too heavily on the 4% rule. Yes, that's the rule where you take 4% of your retirement portfolio as an initial starting withdrawal amount to live from, and you adjust each year for inflation. So, for example, if you have $1 million, you can comfortably and safely withdraw $40,000 a year. You can adjust that $40,000 each year upward for inflation. Now, that's not everything. Using that $40,000, you'll add that figure to what other sources of income that you have coming in, whether it be Social Security, part-time work, rental income, a pension, so on and so forth. And you use all of those figures together to see if you can comfortably afford to retire. Now, most people, this is where it goes wrong, treat that rule as gospel. And they think, if I can't make 4% withdrawals from my portfolio work, then I'm clearly not able to retire. Now, that's not bad financial advice, but it misses the mark in a number of ways and could be costing you valuable years of retirement. And that's what we're going to unpack, because you in retirement want to have a financial plan that's tailored to you and nobody else. That rule was built over 30 years ago. And in fact, even the founder of that rule, Bill Bengen, the guy who created it, has said that rule is now outdated. And because of market environments, inflation, just changing environments, that rule, Bill Bengen says, needs to be updated to closer to 4.7 or even 5%. So instead of treating that 4% rule as cold hard fact, I think it's better to recalibrate, to test your plan around your age, your spending needs, and even today's market conditions. And most importantly, I want you to know, and this is what Bill talks about in his rule, is that the 4% rule, it's static. And we know financial planning is anything but that. See, the 4% rule assumes you're going to spend the exact same amount in perpetuity in year 1 as in year 30. But what we know, looking at retirement data and statistics, is that we tend to spend more in our 50s and 60s than we do in our 70s, 80s, and 90s. This is what Michael Kitces, the researcher, refers to as our go-go, slow-go, and no-go years. And so with a 4% rule, if we blanket that across all 30 years of our retirement, we could be holding ourselves back, or worse. What happens if the market drops by 15, 20, 25%? Suddenly, that safe withdrawal rate is now based off a much smaller portfolio. And so if that $1 million is now cut to 750,000, we're living off of a much smaller number. So instead of clinging to that 4%, let's build a plan together that works in good markets, bad markets, and everything in between. In fact, Bill Bengen, the forefather of the 4% rule, created this rule based off a worst case scenario to see, statistically speaking, throughout history, what a portfolio could actually withstand. And this rule was created in the early 90s after a terrible stretch of back-to-back bear markets in 1973, 1974, and sky-high inflation throughout the 70s and the 80s. And so that's not the same environment we find ourselves in today. Sure, today's markets has its own host of challenges, but retirees now have way more tools for retirement planning at their disposal than they did 30 years ago. Now, the big beef that I have with this rule is that it's too simplistic, it's too rigid, and it entirely misses the mark that leads to people saving too much money and working longer than they need to. I'm a fan of people saving money. That's part of my job. But if we're already ready to retire, go get busy with retirement. Go enjoy. Don't sit behind that desk one day longer than you actually need to. Because this rule entirely misses the mark for people that have oversaved. It doesn't say anything about people that maybe have a second source of income coming in. Their house is already paid off, or they want to work part-time in retirement, because all of these things, it leads to a reduction in how much you actually need to have saved and what you need to pull from your portfolio. You don't need the 4% rule to work if you have other income sources coming into your portfolio for retirement. And so if we fail to recognize this one rule, we end up missing the fact that you're already financially ready to retire. So again, we have to have a plan that adapts and shifts and aligns with our retirement, and more importantly, knows who we are. We don't need generic cookie cutter advice. We need a plan that's unique to us. Even if the 4% rule is overly simplistic and overly conservative in getting us to maybe work a little longer, save a little more, it ends up working more times than not. It's not a bad thing, but here's where I want you to pay attention to and where I think it fails and is actually really dangerous. It's when the 4% rule doesn't move. It's static, it's outdated, and when sequence of return risk shows up, or what I like to call just my luck or Murphy's Law, that's when we experience really bad markets in retirement, and we don't know what the market's going to do in the future, especially in your retirement. That's a big unknown risk. And so we know bad markets will at some point show up, and how we respond to them, what we do with our spending plan, determines how successful we're going to be in retirement. Because if we find ourselves in a place being static and sticking to that 4% rule, well, now our portfolio is lower and we have to spend less. Or if we don't make that adjustment and we end up spending the exact same amount we did last year based off that 4% rule, we're now actually spending more than 4%. Are you with me here? If your portfolio was at $1 million, we could spend that $40,000, and now our portfolio is down 20%. It's off of $800,000. Now we could only spend, by following the 4% rule, $32,000. But if we're spending that same $40,000 and we never make that adjustment, well, what's way higher than 4%? Take the last decade, for example, the period from 1999 to 2009. Now, during this time, the market got hit with two massive corrections. This was the dot-com bubble in 1999 and the Great Recession in 2009 that we all know. And during that time, even though equity markets throughout the 2000s rallied and recovered, if we look at starting point from 99 to 2009, your portfolio was flat. And if we were following, let's say we retired in 2000 with $1 million and we followed that 4% rule, by 2013, even after sticking with that plan, we'd be left with just over $700,000. That's a significant decline in just a short, little more than a decade period. And that's assuming we only took out 4%. Because if we needed to actually spend more than that while our portfolio was down, that outcome was way, way worse. Now, as rough as market declines can be on our portfolio, one thing that's way worse, and it's a silent killer, it's inflation. Because during the 1970s, inflation had averaged around 8% a year for over a decade. And that absolutely devastated your purchasing power. Now, markets, they recover, and we know that from history speaking. But inflation, it's here to stay. And so once prices go up as a result of inflation, it is really difficult for them to come back down. In fact, what we often see is inflation slows down and prices gradually rise at a much slower rate. So the rate of inflation is slowing down, but the prices, they're not falling back down to where they were. The rate at which they're adjusting or increasing has just slowed down. And so what we have to do instead is have a systematic, or what I like to call a dynamic withdrawal approach. This is the guardrail approach that adjusts our spending based off of how the market performs. So in good seasons, we have two choices. We could either spend more, we can give ourselves that green light, or we could squirrel away more money for worse times. And when markets are bad, when we experience nasty bear markets, we spend less. We give our portfolio that breathing room, that fighting chance. So what can we do instead? Well, we solve by knowing our number. I stress on this in so many of my videos, by really understanding what goes into our budget. What are we going to spend? Now, when we go at our firm, line by line, through a client's expenses, retirement, in our case, ends up always turning out to be way less expensive than most people tend to estimate. There's no more commuting, no more payroll taxes. Taxes now just look different. No more setting aside thousands of dollars for savings and retirement every year. Now, that said, here's what people tend to leave out of their budget, and I'll link to a sample budget that Vanguard placed on their website that I think is a fantastic comprehensive budget. But things that people tend to leave out, it's healthcare costs of insurance. This is either before age 65, so Affordable Care Act, out-of-pocket costs, and then at Medicare, we have premiums that are usually deducted from Social Security, but then we also have co-pays and medications and things like that. So healthcare and insurance is number one. Travel and actually budgeting it realistically. People tend to underestimate how much they want to spend on those trips. Vehicle maintenance, and let's not forget about taxes, which leads me into my next point, which is it's not what you earn, it's what you keep after taxes. Now, in retirement, where there's no paycheck coming in, money's going to be moving the other way, which is coming out. And we need to have a game plan for how we plan to take our money out in retirement and how we plan to distribute that money in our 50s, 60s, and 70s, because our money is going to be taxed differently depending on where it's located. So money in a savings account or a high yield account isn't going to be taxed much at all outside of interest. Money in a brokerage account is going to be taxed at capital gains. We like those because that's taxed anywhere from 0 to 15 or maybe even 20%, depending on long-term capital gains and where your tax brackets fall. And then we have our ordinary income. This is money taking out from a 401k, an IRA, 403b, pre-tax money. I don't like that. That's our least favorite one. And then, of course, we have everybody's favorite, which is the Roth IRA. That is tax-free. And so we need to have a plan for where we're going to take our first dollar from. And that changes, as I mentioned earlier, from our 50s to our 70s. And this is why income mapping and knowing our tax bracket is so important. And it starts by knowing how much we need to withdraw from our accounts and then having what I like to call a tax plan to understand where that first dollar is going to come from. And when you combine it with a tax efficient withdrawal strategy, it ends up being even lower. And so you may end up needing to withdraw even less than you thought. Because again, at the end of the day, if we have a smart tax efficient withdrawal strategy, it's not what you earn, but it's what you keep after taxes. So picture this, you're 60 years old and you and your spouse, you've just retired, and guess what? You have no income. That means you two have just dropped from the 24 or 32% tax bracket or higher all the way down to the 10% tax bracket. And so what do we do next? Well, here's what we don't do. We don't just run to our IRA or 401k and pull all our distributions out from pre-tax assets, taxed at ordinary income, and fill up our bracket. No. We're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to look for ways to strategically use our lower tax brackets to our advantage. We have a couple different options. But the point is we have options here and we get to build our plan. And so we can either pull money from our brokerage account. Why? Because if our taxable income is low enough, you can actually pay nothing in capital gains tax. That's right. If our income's low enough, the cutoff is, I believe, $48,350 if you're single, or $96,700 if we're married filing jointly. That is a huge opportunity to live tax-free in retirement without touching our Roth IRA. Now, here's another benefit you may or may not be aware of. If we're not yet on Medicare, that means we're younger than 65, your Affordable Care Act healthcare premiums, that's open market, they're also based on your adjusted gross income. If you control your income well enough, it isn't just about taxes, it's about keeping your healthcare costs low as well. So at that point, you have two roads. Do we live in a lower tax bracket? Do we pay less in healthcare expenses, or do we use that lower tax bracket to our advantage to do Roth conversions? That's right, prepaying our taxes at a lower bracket today to enjoy tax-free growth tomorrow and in the future. Now, both cases are valid, but the key is that an early retirement gives you flexibility, and it all starts with knowing your number. Because when your lifestyle costs are lower, you don't need as much income from your portfolio. In fact, the 4% rule, it no longer applies. And so let's finish it here and tie it all together of how can you actually retire at age 60 while ignoring that 4% trap. And it starts with this framework. Number one, go to the Vanguard tool. Look at your budget. Start with a clear spending analysis. Understand what your spending number is, which leads you into the second point of understanding your multiple income sources. It's not enough for your portfolio to be your only source of income. It puts too much stress on it. So building multiple income sources, whether it's a pension, part-time income, Social Security, rental income, whatever it is, building those multiple income sources allows us to tune out the noise on the 4% rule. And number three, having a flexible withdrawal strategy allows us to spend less during times where markets aren't so great, building more breathing room for our portfolio until markets recover. So having a game plan of understanding what to spend and adjusting that when markets are down until recovery, which leads us to the fourth point, which is having a plan that adjusts and adapts to be flexible. Understanding that retirement is all about trade-offs, whether that's working longer and spending more or working less and spending less. And importantly, making retirement personal. It's not about following these generic cookie cutter pieces of advice, but rather creating a plan that works for you. And most importantly, it adapts and adjusts as your life unfolds So hope you found this video to be helpful. Thank you again for taking the time. If you have questions, go ahead and ask your question in the chat. I'll be sure to get to each and every one of them. And if you'd like a personalized Loom assessment, go ahead and click on the link in the description below, and we will send you, after you fill out the survey, a personalized Loom video walking you through step by step the action items that you could take to make retirement your own. Thanks again. We'll see you in the next one.